Florida is home to many exotic and unique animals, from alligators, venomous snakes, elusive panthers, exotic birds, to lovable West Indian manatee. Visitors from all over the world travel to Florida to get a glimpse of these magnificent creatures. But what you may not know is that all of these animals can be found in the small town of Homosassa at the L.E. Schiller Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park. This state-funded park has been the home for thousands of native animals, as well as the local celebrity hippopotamus named Lou. Over 300,000 people visit the park each year to view the exhibits, breathtaking springs, and attend one of the many interactive programs presented by park rangers and volunteers. The park also works with local and state wildlife groups to care for orphaned or injured animals and educate the public about wildlife conservation and the local environment. So join us as we take a walk on the wild side at the L.E. Schiller Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park on Gems of the Nature Coast. While riding along Highway 19 in Homosassa, it's hard to miss Bubbles the Manatee greeting you from the Visitor Center of the Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park. The Visitor Center features a wide variety of exhibits and educational information about the local wildlife. Wall displays document the growth and progression of the springs and the park throughout the years. The park has been a tourist attraction since the early 1900s, when trains stopped at the springs to let passengers rest between destinations. The ownership of the springs area has changed multiple times since 1940. Originally, there was only one building on the property, and at the time it was used as an entrance to a zoo-like park containing numerous exotic animals. This building is still in use today at the park's Education Center. In 1963, the Chicago Cattle Feed Holding Company bought most of the land around the springs. Mr. Bruce A. Norris, owner of the holding company, planned to build a large city in the area. He invested a lot of time and money dredging the waterway that is now used to transport visitors to and from the park. It was during this time when Ivan Tour's animal actors started to utilize the park to house some of their trained animals when they were not appearing in movies or television shows. One of the most popular animal stars at the time was a black bear named Buck, who was a stand-in for Gentle Ben in the television series. Another popular star at the park was Lucifer the hippopotamus. Lucifer's acting credits include roles in the 1960s movies Cowboy in Africa and Doctari, as well as appearances on the Jack Linkletter Show and Herb Alpert specials. Lucifer, or Lou as he is called by the locals, is over 50 years old and remains a prominent resident at the park to the enjoyment of many of the park's visitors. Before Mr. Norris could realize his dream of a large city, the country entered into a period of recession and the holding company had to be dissolved. Canadian Pacific purchased the park. They held on to it for about 4 years, after which they decided that the investment did not meet their requirements. Canadian Pacific put the park up for sale, and the citizens of Citrus County persuaded the county government to purchase the park. County commissioners reluctantly took ownership of this still exotic zoo-like park, and on January 1, 1989, the Florida State Park Service purchased the park from the county. All exotic animals and non-native plants were removed to restore and return the park to the real Florida. Your wildlife adventure begins with a boat ride down Pepper Creek, leading to the West Gate entrance. The creek gets its name from early Native Americans that would utilize the pepper plant that was plentiful in the area. They would use this plant for a variety of uses, including dye and medicine. Homosassa means home of the pepper. Your captain guides your boat with interesting facts and history about the park and the local wildlife. The creek is lined with trees filled with Spanish moss and sable palm trees, the state tree of Florida. Nesting boxes for wood ducks provided by the Park Service dot the creek, and if you look closely, you may spot osprey nests towering high above. There are plenty of indigenous reptiles and birds greeting you as you make your way into the park. The park is built around a beautiful spring which produces millions of gallons of fresh water each hour flowing into the Homosassa River. One of the interesting attractions of the park is the Fishbowl. Originally called Nature's Giant Fishbowl, it was the first attraction in Homosassa Springs, and a 3-tiered observatory was built along the springs in the 1940s. Later, a 108-ton floating fishbowl was built in Ocala and assembled on-site on a ramp near the springs. To avoid contaminating the water with oil or grease, workers used hundreds of banana peels to reduce the friction and slide the floating structure into place. Today, it's a floating observatory where visitors can view the natural habitat filled with 34 varieties of fresh and saltwater fish.
Well, this is the main spring at Homosassa Springs Wildlife State Park, and our floating underwater observatory, which we call the Fishbowl. This has been here since the time, well, the Native Americans lived in this area very much because they took advantage of the fishing opportunities and so forth. And even as early as the 1920s, when the mullet train came through Homosassa, it would stop and people would get off and look at this amazing spring with all its fish. There was a little walkway at that time that went across that they could walk out over it and look directly down in. In the 40s, it became a privately owned attraction, and it was called the Nature's Giant Fishbowl. And of course, with that name, that this was the main feature. And it was they had a different kind of observatory, which was a 3-story above ground, which you could go up high and look straight down in. So, and then in the 60s is when they introduced the fishbowl we have today, which is a floating structure. Besides the manatees, which is what people seem to be looking for a lot, but at one time they had a university group come in and count the different varieties of fish they saw, and there were I believe 34 different varieties of fresh and saltwater fish, and probably more saltwater fish than fresh because there are salt springs down the river here. So, yeah, there's a lot of different types of fish that come and go.
Visitors can also get an intimate look at the West Indian manatee who visit the springs. The manatee are naturally attracted to the springs by an enticing warm temperature and can often be seen floating by the underwater observatory to the delight of the audience. Rarely are you able to see the beauty of these underwater mammals so close. As well as an attraction, the wildlife park is also a rehabilitation facility for injured or orphaned manatee. Their partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission allows them to care and treat injured manatee back to health for release into the wild.
This area is, we call our Manatee Care Center, and we are a facility that we do rehabilitation of injured and orphaned manatees. And in the recent past, we've had red tide issues in Southwest Florida. And the medical facilities, like they have at Lowry Park Zoo and SeaWorld, get overcrowded. So we will take some of the ones that are on the mend, take them up here and put them in in the background you'll see a larger facility. That's the above ground pool. We can control the temperature of the water in that facility. And there's also a floor that can be raised up so the veterinarians can check the manatees and so on. When they're ready to be released, they can be hoisted up in a canvas sling with a crane, and there's an in-ground pool that's closer to us They'll be put in there, and there's a chute here with gates that open up that they can go right out into the spring and be released. So it's a very less stressful situation for them. So that's part of our role as a rehab facility for manatees.
One of the unique features of the park is the elevated boardwalk that provides a perfect view of all the exhibits around the park.
This area is called the Wildlife Walk, and it's all elevated boardwalks and past the different animal habitats. We try to keep the habitats as natural as possible, so this way visitors can look into the habitat, in most cases unobstructed with fencing and so forth.
It's hard to miss the bird sanctuary, located in the middle of the boardwalk, where hundreds of birds gather, creating a dazzling show of contrasting colors and sounds. Over 23 different species can be found in the sanctuary.
There's a lot of birds in this area that we're looking at. We have our flamingos and right on cue, and egrets, and some vultures are out there today. I know we'll see some ibis too along the way. And as you walk along the Wildlife Walk, you'll see the Wildlife Encounter Pavilion. That's where we do our wildlife encounter programs. And our black bears, the shorebird aviary, and birds of prey. And as you wind around, you'll see the red wolves.
While traveling on the boardwalk, you'll come across the beautiful Garden of the Springs. The garden is filled with Florida native plants and is a perfect setting for weddings as well as events such as the park's annual Night of Lights. Every year around Christmas, the garden is decorated with lights of all colors and timed to music, creating a spectacular evening guaranteed to fill you with a holiday spirit.
This area is the Garden of the Springs. This is where we have our celebration of lights every year, but it's also a beautiful place, especially in the spring like now. All the azalea plants are starting to bloom. A few years ago, we introduced this gazebo, so we have a lot of weddings here. So it's a really pretty area.
In addition to the beautiful flowers and landscape, the garden also features an overlook onto the Homosassa River, where you might spot a manatee swimming alongside a kayaker. For those who aren't squeamish, be sure to visit the park's reptile exhibit, where you can get up close and personal with some of the most notorious snakes in Florida. In 2002, the park got a phone call from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation. A pair of black bear cubs had been abandoned by their mother and needed a permanent home. The park was grateful for the opportunity and nursed the cubs back to health. Now fully grown, they serve as ambassadors for the species to help Florida educate and bring awareness to the public about the significant decline of the Florida black bear population.
This is Brutus, one of our 2 Florida black bears. They were actually rescued by FWC biologists. As the tiny cubs, they had been abandoned by the mother. And our park manager at the time, Art Urian, got a phone call at 11 o'clock at night, will you take 2 bear cubs? And if you raise them up, they're probably not going to be able to be released again. So it would be a lifetime commitment for them. And he said yes. And they've grown quite a bit since that day.
One of the most recent additions to the park is the Shorebird Sanctuary.
This is our one of our recent additions, shorebird aviary. And it's about 4 times the size of the original shorebird aviary we had here. And one of the big differences is you can walk inside and you can take, if you're into photography, you can take wonderful pictures and you're not shooting through wire and so forth. We've also been able to increase the number and varieties of shorebirds we have here at the park. So it's really a nice addition.
The Birds of Prey exhibit features the majestic bald eagle proudly posing in front of the American flag. They can measure up to 43 inches in length and have a wingspan up to 7.5 feet. Their eyes are 5 to 6 times more powerful than the humans, and they can spot a rabbit in a field up to a mile away. The red-tailed hawk is also on display. This raptor is found throughout the prairies, savannas, and pampas from Florida to the Argentines. These birds feed mainly on insects, worms, grubs, lizards, and mice. They often run along the ground rather than flying to find their prey. The great horned owl is found throughout most of North America to South and Central America. They're found in wooded wilderness areas as well as suburbs and city parks. These owls can be distinguished from the long-eared owl by their size, bulky shape, and white throat. The park also has a variety of wild cats. One of the more common species is the bobcat. This medium-sized wild cat has excellent vision and hearing, making them the perfect predator, able to take down small animals like rabbits, squirrels, birds, and even small deer. You'll also find one of the rarely seen wildcats in Florida, the elusive Florida panther. It is estimated that only 150 panthers are left in Florida, making them one of the most endangered species in the world. Along with illegal hunting and collisions with cars and trucks, this cat also faces serious health issues stemming from inbreeding and contamination of habitat. This is one of the few places where you can see this magnificent creature, and the park continues to help educate the public and support the conservation of the species for future generations. The park is now home to 3 red wolves. The once common red wolf has decreased throughout the years, and the park is involved in a program to help reintroduce these animals back into Florida.
This is a relatively new exhibit here at the park. We are part of a program to try and reintroduce red wolves into Florida. They used to be fairly common, and now they are not at all. And so we're working with the Brevard Zoo and some other agencies. And these 3 red wolves we have here are actually brothers from the same litter. And so they've grown up together here. And when they get to old enough, they may be brought out for a breeding program, and if that's successful, they could be reintroducing red wolves into northern Florida, I believe. So, so that's part of what we do here, and they're wonderful animals.
If you're in the park around 12:30, be sure to head to the Alligator Lagoon. Every day at this time, the park presents an educational program featuring these swamp predators. Alligators are at home in the water as well as land. They average 15 feet in length and appear to be very slow in their movements, but when it's feeding time, they can strike quickly. The most popular and beloved resident of the park is not a Florida native at all. Lou the Hippo has called the park home since the 1960s and has become a local celebrity. He was a big movie star when this was an exotic animal park, and the local residents took a special liking to Lou, often visiting him between his many movies. When the park went strictly native species, it was time for Lou to leave. Well, when the locals found out about the impending transfer, they put up a fight to keep Lou at the park. Hundreds of local citizens and school children protested the removal of this fan favorite. Their voices were heard from the state level, and Lou was granted honorary state citizenship from Governor Lawton Chiles in 1991. Every year, the community comes together to celebrate Lou's birthday as the park presents him with his own custom cake made with bread and sweet frosting as children from the Homosassa Elementary School sing happy birthday. Though he may be a little reluctant to sign autographs, he's always happy to put on a great show for his audience. Just make sure you're not in the splatter zone. The Ellie Schiller Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park continues to be a main attraction on the Nature Coast as well as an ambassador of Florida's endangered species. The park offers leisurely cruises down the creek, beautiful springs, rich local history, and amazing wildlife. So whether you're a tourist from out of state, a local resident, photographer, or wildlife enthusiast, there's always something new to discover. The Ellie Schiller Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park truly is a gem of the Nature Coast.